and it is my honor to guide you through this event. And before we start, the usual technical note: this event will be recorded, and all speakers and presenters gave already their consent. Thank you very much for that. So the recording will also be available afterwards. Having said that, it is now my great pleasure to hand over to Georg Teutsch, Scientific Managing Director from the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, for some greetings. Professor Teutsch, please.
Thank you very much. Dear Commissioner Wojciechowski, dear Commission members, dear scientists, dear audience. Can you hear me well? Good.
Yes, we can hear.
Agricultural lands are facing a crisis. Biodiversity is declining, soil is eroding, land is drying out, and in many areas there are no pollinators left, but there is also no long-term perspective for the people and their well-being. The biodiversity crisis and climate crisis are a kind of a twin crisis for farming. We cannot expect a sustainable production on a dead land. The science is there, and it is very clear. We do know what could be done, and we know it is achievable. The CAP reform will soon be over. This is the last and decisive moment between using the science or ignoring it. The decision between taking a kind of leap of hope, a courageous decision to do the right thing, or continuing the declining trend with all consequences on biodiversity, water quality, and other crucial ecosystem services. Now, this event is one of many which took place during the past years. It is part of a long process which should finally result into concrete measures of actions. The scientists warned in 2014 that greening will not work. This was published in Science. And it was demonstrated in 2017 that it does. And at the same time, scientists recommended what could be done. In 2017, Guy Pear, who is also the initiator of today's event, led a comprehensive fitness check assessment of the entire CAP, showing that it is not fit for purpose. In 2019, scientists evaluated the Commission's proposal for the next CAP against the SDG goals and warned that it is definitely not on track. Again, this was published in Science. Now we have reached a kind of a climax. 3,600 scientists published a detailed report which led to today's consultation event. I think this is a unique chance to materialize a fruitful cooperation between scientists and policymakers. The scientists were invited by the Commission to conduct an independent process of collecting recommendations to the EU and to the member states on how to make the CAP work for biodiversity. They managed to run 13 workshops in Europe within only 2 months and obtain inputs from more than 300 scientists in 22 member states. This collective effort shows the fundamental interest of the scientists to seriously contribute to a better agricultural policy. They offer pathways towards a sustainable future for farming, for food production, and the farmers in Europe. We do need a healthy food production in Europe, healthy in multiple perspectives. And at the same moment, it is not at the moment at this stage. And the proposals for the CAP reform are so far not sufficient, unfortunately. This brings me to the expectations. I think it is fair to say that science has delivered. It is now the role and responsibility of policymakers to make use of this knowledge in the best way possible. We talk about a huge budget of 365 billion euros. It is your responsibility as policymakers to make this taxpayers' money work towards a better European agricultural policy, which, for example, does not waste its financial resources on greenhouse gas rich and biodiversity poor regions with the economic benefit mostly for large farmers. The scientists made proposals for a better policy. Listen to the science. Nature doesn't read policy papers, so it's not enough to write down things how they should improve. Nature follows the rules of nature, And scientists aim to understand, interpret, and communicate. But now we need actually accountable measures of action. It is therefore exciting to have this well-mixed event today with scientists and policymakers. And we are very happy to see the personal participation of the EU Commissioner on Agriculture, Janusz Wojciechowski. And I really look forward to the meeting and give the floor to the Commissioner, who is going to deliver the opening speech. Thank you and welcome again.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? It's okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to speak at this workshop on biodiversity and the common agricultural policy. The CAP never stands still. It always has to improve its performance. And to make this happen, we need high quality input from around the EU based on observation, experience, sound science, and careful reflection. Therefore, I welcome this independent report, which contains much to reflect on. With regard on the CAP and biodiversity, no one would claim that our work is done. The farmland of the European Union provides essential habitats for many species of plants and animals. We should remember the hard work which our farmers already do in taking care of these habitats. Nevertheless, we see that farmland biodiversity is still under pressure, especially in some regions. In some areas, pressures come from intensive practices, including high use of fertilizers and pesticides. But in other areas, especially high nature value grasslands, the danger is that farmers give up farming altogether because they can no longer make a living. And there is this has terrible consequences for the habitats and species which depend on farmland landscapes. Therefore, the European Union's biodiversity strategy pays close attention to what is happening on Europe's farmland, though the strategy is not only about farming, and in combination with our farm to fork strategy, as you know, it sets out a range of targets relevant to farmland biodiversity. This concern landscape features, pesticides, nutrient losses, and organic farming. These strategies and others which are linked to the European Green Deal are central to the Commission's vision for the next few years. It is not only for the common agricultural policy to achieve this vision, but the CAP certainly has a major part to play. The CAP must make an effective and efficient contribution to overall sustainability, environmental, economic, and social. Where tensions exist between these aspects of sustainability, the CAP must help to resolve them. It must ensure that farmers can make a living from working in harmony with nature. You know, the intense discussion are currently taking place about the future CAP between the Council, the European Parliament, and the Commission. I will not comment in detail on those talks today. However, I'd like to make 3 points about what the Commission expects, which are relevant to biodiversity. First, the CAP must be based on the genuine results-based approach. This must be a reality, not just a promise. That means that we must have good indicators and strong system of monitoring. Second, the system of conditionality must provide a firm foundation of basic requirements regarding care for the environment and climate. And third, we must be ambitious in terms of minimum required levels of spending on the environment and climate within CAP strategic plans. This includes a significant budget for effective and ambitious eco schemes, but also for relevant tools in the CAP second pillar. Farms of all shapes and size must be involved in efforts to improve agricultural biodiversity. No one can say that this issue is for someone else. But I'd like to emphasize that in some cases, smaller farms may start with an advantage. Some regions with a small farm average farm size may have kept more field margins and landscape features from the past, including hedgerows, stone walls, and trees. And where farmland is divided into smaller parcels, there may be greater general landscape variety between different crops and small grazing areas. This is part of our natural capital, something to be treasured. The CAP must help us preserve and enlarge it. Of course, even when we have political agreement in the trialogues, the work on the CAP's future will not stop. We must give member states all the support they need to design high-quality CAP strategic plans. An important step towards this came last December. That was when the Commission addressed recommendations to member states. Those recommendations identified points of addressed in the CAP plans. We also published a first list of indicative eco schemes, setting our ambitions for this new tool. Your report helps to further support this ambition by sharing your recommendation to member states and to the Commission when assessing these plans. The work on designing CAP plans will become more intense in the second half of this year and also in 2022 when the plans must be approved. Member states are required to involve civil society in this process of design. Your report is therefore opportune. Even when the ink is dry on the plans and they are agreed, the story goes on. And the plans are implemented, we must monitor and evaluate them, checking what is working well, what is working less well, and what needs to be adjusted. In all of this task ahead, the Commission looks forward to close partnership between EU institutions, member states, civil society, and the scientific community. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you very much also, Mr. Teutsch, for an inspiring opening words and making clear the relevance and the urgency of the topic. And for now, we are getting to the first presentation. That is a presentation that is providing an overview of the study, of the approach, and the key outcomes. And I think we can already start sharing the slides. Thank you very much. We are hearing now a presentation given by Guy PR, German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, IDIF, and Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, and together with his colleague Maren Birkenstock from the Thun Institute of Rural Studies. And Guy and Maren, please go ahead. And as discussed, please tell Jenny who is sharing your slides when you want to go to the next slide. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, for participating in this meeting and listening. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your opening words, and Professor Teutsch for your greetings. I'm thrilled to finally release the outcomes of several months of intensive work and the contributions by hundreds of scientists on how to make the Common Agricultural Policy work for biodiversity. And I'd like to start with a short background of why we are doing that and what is the baseline. Please go ahead. Next slide, please. So we all know that biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation are a major threat, not only to nature, but also for farmers and farming in Europe and globally. It is not because of the common agricultural policy that this is happening, but because of a set of many different factors affecting farmers and nature. But the common agricultural policy, the CAP, has not yet succeeded in halting these trends. Having accumulated huge amount of knowledge about what needs to be done, over 3,600 scientists signed a call for action with 10 recommendations of how the CAP could make sustainability happen and address sustainability challenges. Next, please. The consequence of this publication was that a large number of people have participated in science policy meetings, and in meetings with policymakers, we were encountered by positive attitude and the will to listen and to think together. And we were positively surprised in a way about how much attention there was towards our offer of help. We're not asking whether the CAP should meet the biodiversity objective. It is one of 9 objectives. All of them are equally important and all of them have to be met. So the question we are asking is, given that this is an important objective, how can science be collected and used in an effective way to make this happen? Now, there is no single person in Europe that has sufficient knowledge to cover for the heterogeneity of different areas, of different farming system, etc. This is why, in order to deliver the recommendations for the EU and member states, we called for scientists voluntarily to conduct workshops in as many member states as possible. And we were thrilled to see the response of the scientific community, organizing 13 workshops in merely 2 months, followed by an online survey, which allowed us to harvest further inputs, especially on the flagship eco schemes, which Maren Birkenstock will talk about soon. The consequence, this report is the outcome of over 300 scientists and other experts providing their knowledge. Next, please. The first set of results that I would like to present to you are those that emerged as consensus point through all the workshops. Those issues which are really the key emerging principles to make the CAP work for biodiversity. The first one is that landscape features and semi-natural areas, especially extensively used permanent grasslands, are the core elements to focus on. These are the key for success. Many other measures are important, but these are really the central elements for success. The second thing is that if you want to protect biological diversity, you need other types of diversity as well. You need habitat diversity, you need complex landscapes, you need multifunctionality. And when you take a landscape which is multifunctional, it means that you also manage to meet the win-win options of biodiversity and other objectives, climate, water, soil, and the needs of farmers. Now, because nature doesn't have borders, animals and plants do not see the borders of a field, we have to work on a larger scale. We have to work on the landscape level, and that requires spatial planning and regionalization to account for the heterogeneity between different areas. That will make the same amount of money far more efficient because we're basically planning what to do, as in any other network of systems that need to operate. In order to achieve that, we need farmers to collaborate and cooperate with each other. And we need to allow them to take a result-based approach where the knowledge that they have or the knowledge of experts can be used locally to say, don't tell me what to do, but what to achieve. I will do that, because a lot of people have this knowledge on the ground and it's very hard to determine that from above. Last but not least, a key operating principle is to engage those that have to do the work. Eventually, it's the farmers and other land users that are operating on the field. We need to make sure that there's enough communication, education, training, and engagement to improve the acceptance of those compulsory measures that have to be taken for insurance reasons, for production in the future, for instance, in order to increase the uptake of voluntary measures to make sure that we are not ending up with money unspent for good purposes, to facilitate quick learning, adaptive management, and to generate a sense of ownership and stewardship, which will allow expanding good practices and take them onwards. Next slide, please. So how do we make the green architecture work? First of all, let's have a look at the 3 key components of the green architecture. One of them is enhanced conditionality. These are the set of standards that have to be met. And if these standards are too low, if they're operating only on the arable area, for instance, and not on the entire farmed area, if we are including production-oriented options under non-production land, or if we exclude our work from beyond protected areas already as recommended by the CAP, for instance, on permanent grasslands already on the current CAP and not implemented, then we will not be managing to put standards that are high enough. We may need to make sure that the standards are good enough so that we will not be paying for those things that have to be done simply because this is good practice. This was mentioned by workshop participants, especially for 3 of the GAICs, or the good agricultural and environmental conditions that you can see on this slide. The second instrument and the most established one are agri-environment climate measures. We don't need to invent the wheel. We have it already. We just need to make sure that it rolls well. That requires expanding the budgets for agri-environment measures and taking the opportunity of making sure that it's not just income foregone. If you pay for transaction costs in various ways, you could generate benefits to participants. Farmers do need to benefit from what they're doing. And if they provide more, they need to generate more benefit. Otherwise, we will not be managing to generate those benefits that will incentivize good practices. Next, please. Of course, this brings us to the novel and innovative instrument, which is eco-schemes. Here we have an immense potential. With eco-schemes joining on agri-environment measures, we could as well double the total budget for biodiversity, if not beyond that, if they are well designed and implemented. If they are based on evidence, they're clearly linked to biodiversity objectives, they go beyond conditionality. If they're attractive and if they're simple, both for administrators to handle and for farmers to implement. We need to strive for continuity over time, because with an annual payment, you will not achieve those benefits that are generated over time. These are critical for biodiversity. Now, we know that the Commission has concrete ideas of how to make it multi-annual. This is not yet clear to us, but hopefully will be clear soon. But these are risks that have to be considered as well. And workshop participants did mention that eco-schemes as an innovative tool might not work, especially if they're diluted by ineffective measures, or if we add more and more objectives that take either the budget or the potential for success of this instrument. So it's not to say that other objectives are less important, but if you want to address other objectives that conflict biodiversity targets, then you're actually causing some dilution effect, which could be risky. And still another risk is the competition with agri-environment measures. By having said, okay, we are investing eco schemes, let's take the money away from those measures that actually work, we might create a risk. Now, how do these instruments work together? How do they operate together with other instruments? This is something that we will hear in the next presentation after me by John Finn from Ireland. Let's continue to the next slide, please. Now, another discussion which is going on is this question of a list-based eco schemes. They might be based on a menu system. We're not saying they should or should not. There are pros and cons to both approaches or to other approaches. For instance, result-based implementation does not require a menu. And so we first of all listed those pros and cons, and then suggested that if they're adopting this approach of taking a menu direction, then scoping will be critical to make sure that we include those measures that work and exclude those that don't. And here are just a few examples of what might work, which would be, of course, to protect and restore non-productive land and landscape features, to expand from what workshop participants were saying that the minimum should be 5%, and then using it to expand to 10%. But that, of course, will depend on member states. There's a lot more nature in some countries. To focus on extensive and extensifying the use of permanent grasslands, restoration of habitat quality, and so on and so forth. In the report, you'll see a longer list, of course. There are also issues that will impede success if they're listed, such as boost schemes. If we're incorporating more income-oriented payments that don't have to do with biodiversity, or precision farming, which has benefits for other issues, but actually does not benefit biodiversity, or at least forms of it can even hamper biodiversity. Or again, if we list catch crops and green cover, which have been the key elements to dilute greening, then we will be going back to greening 2.0, and we don't want to be there. Another interesting input was that there are some issues that don't necessarily need to be paid for specifically, but they should operate horizontally, such as standards in eco-scheme for soil, for water use and chemical inputs. They are not exactly a specific scheme within. Next slide, please. I'd like to give a few of the results regarding implementation as well. The negotiations will soon be over, but implementation is only starting. And here recommendations were made, first of all, on how to set the targets right. And basically across all workshops, the participants were saying, you need to align the CAP with the Green Deal and with other strategies and agreements, the biodiversity strategy, the climate, etc. Because if you do that, then basically you save yourself all the effort of inventing new targets or indicators. They're already listed by these agreements and they're achievable. They're what you call SMART. You need to regionalize your targets because sometimes it doesn't make sense to create a target for the EU or even for a member state, which is large. You need to do it for a national or regional level, depending on the conditions. And you need to set yourself interim targets so that you meet the targets within a year or 2 or 3, and not just set targets for the entire multi-annual financial framework. And at the end, you say, well, we didn't meet them. That will be too late. In one of the presentations, soon enough, you will be hearing about 7 criteria how the European Commission can evaluate strategic plans for ambition. What exactly is ambition? And some examples here are that member states have to acknowledge the problems that they have. These are differing between the different member states. Once you define the problems well, then you could resolve them, and you need to show a clear intervention logic. This instrument with this measure will resolve this problem, and a breadth of action which is broad enough to resolve this problem. Another principle which is really important is no dilution, no backsliding. We should not be losing habitats that are already there, and we should not backslide from investments that were made in the past. Of course, you should also show ambition in budget, in investment into knowledge and administration. Knowledge is very central for success, accountability, and also the capacity to meet the local needs and the adaptive capacities to respond if things don't work. Next slide, please. Now, monitoring and reporting is something that reappears every time. It's of course important for the Commission to evaluate the strategic plans that will be submitted or are being submitted now, but support will be required throughout the implementation period. Performance evaluation is critical. There are some things which need to be resolved. What are the incentives and sanctions for member states that are very ambitious or are less ambitious? How does the member states get incentivized for doing well? There is a set of recommendations within our report that will help give an ideas of how this can happen. Another thing is that we should not forget we're in 2021. There are 2 years until the implementation period will actually start. That means that we need to take the opportunity now to close mapping gaps, to close monitoring gaps for biodiversity, for water and chemical inputs. We need to expand the knowledge support systems. And here, again, the help of the Commission will be critical and central. On the other side, of course, there's a responsibility of the member state to make sure that they are meeting those targets. They need to invest more in monitoring simply because this will be the smallest investment with the biggest impact in making sure that we are not spending money without knowing what we're actually doing. And this needs to be proportional to investments. So particular investment in monitoring, direct payments and conditionality. They need to report yearly and they need to make data accessible. Otherwise, also as scientists, we cannot help in improving. Next slide, please. The final point I want to make has to do with the selection of indicators. Of course, science has a huge amount of knowledge exactly on that topic. And of course, we're not going to open now the discussion of what should be monitored or not, but there are some opportunities. For instance, in the new indicator for complementary results indicator that will be established soon. And in member states, across many member states, there are already operating monitoring schemes, standardized approaches that cover not just birds, but also butterflies, pollinators, flowering plants. Those reporting that member states have to do for the Article 17 of the Habitats Directive, invasive species. All these are relevant for the farm level monitoring. And there are also many citizens that are happy to do that in the form of citizen science, but there are also other ways of doing that. Then we need to also upscale to the landscape level and to take proxies for immediate response. It is a bit unfortunate that there was a decision taken to remove high nature value farmland from the list of impact indicators, because from the responses of the scientists, it was clear that the methods are there. The problem is actually accessibility of standardized data. And if this is resolved, actually there's no reason not to follow what is happening in one of the most important types of landscapes in Europe. This is just an example of some things that can be done, but this has to link back to implementation data to make sure that performance evaluation is taking place, because this will allow us to respond in year 2 if anything doesn't work on year 1. This is the idea of adaptive policy management. With that, I would like to give the floor to Maren to continue on the topic of the eco-scheme flagships proposed by the Commission. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to present the expert comments on the eco-scheme flagships. So please show me my first slide. So these comments were collected in an online survey that took place after our workshops. We asked for comments on 4 flagship eco-scheme options proposed by the Commission last year: agroforestry, agroecology, precision farming, and carbon farming. And we got responses from 89 experts from 22 member states. Before I start to speak about the 4 flagships, I would like to say some words about the flagship which is actually missing from our perspective. For that, please show me my next slide. Much feedback which we have received for the other 4 eco-scheme flagship can be traced back to one common point. To improve biodiversity, an explicit biodiversity flagship may be most effective. So we would recommend key attributes to make this happen. For example, to focus on specific biodiversity targets in action, to include a result-based approach, to focus on landscape targeting, and additionally bonus for collective implementation. Next slide, please. Agroecology, which is one of the first eco-scheme flagships by the European Commission, contains already a large number of relevant options for biodiversity, but not all. So our recommendations are: biodiversity objects need to be much more explicit. We have to prioritize multi-annual commitments to maximize biodiversity benefit. For other environmental objectives, like air quality, water, nutrients, carbon storage, we have to assure that biodiversity benefits are clear and check if they are needed under eco schemes. This is important because, as we have to remember, that measures implemented under eco schemes have to be appropriate and effective, as eco schemes work as an annual practice. So please show me my next slide. Agroforestry as a flagship eco scheme could introduce as an option which is beneficial for biodiversity, but it may also risk support for intensive forestry. So we recommend and focus on preserving existing biodiversity-friendly agroforestry systems and improving their quality. New agroforestry systems need to be tightly linked to biodiversity and to the second pillar. So include site assessment for biodiversity impacts and focus on existing habitats. Next slide. With regards to the impact on precision farming, it is necessary to say that a focus on that does not necessarily mean that it will lead to an improvement. It may even be environmentally harmful. So if you say that we have a broad uptake of precision farming, it may compete with other measures with much higher environmental potential. So for this flagship, it is worth to take a closer look what is financially happening if you do the support as an eco scheme, and therefore linking support to the farmed area. Technology costs do not scale up with farmed areas. So if payment is linked to the area, the risk of significant overcompensations for larger farms are there. So our recommendation is, if you want to take up precision farming at all, it would fit much better under investment support measures. next and already last slide. If you want to implement carbon farming as an eco-scheme flagship, measures and their outcomes highly depend on site, climate, and soil. So our recommendations are focus on maintaining good practice farming, carbon farming, and improving its management. Use eco-scheme as a starting measure, so as an entry point, and entering a long-term commitment under the second pillar, agricultural and climate measures. And even more important, tightly link this measurement to knowledge support, further research and monitoring. We've got this feedback from experts in member states with typically large and small scale farm areas that if you want to implement a carbon management system to farming, it is very important that you implement also knowledge about that. Before I thank you all for your attention and listening to me, maybe one last statement. As we could not see any reason why these 4 flagships were selected by the Commission, we recommend to start with a biodiversity eco-scheme flagship itself from the beginning. Thank you very much for your attention.
Guy and Maren, thank you so much for providing this very dense, but also very comprehensive overview.